Hey there. Tonight we're heading back to one of the darkest, most unsettling chapters in early American history, the Salem witch trials. Trust me, what happened in this small Puritan village will make your modern-day drama feel like a walk in the park. We're talking mass hysteria, spectral evidence, and neighbors turning on each other overnight. If stories like this send chills down your spine, in a good way, I'd love if you hit like or subscribe. Really helps the channel grow. Also, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It never stops blowing my mind how people around the world fall asleep to tales like this. All right, let's light the lantern and step back into 1692, where fear, faith, and paranoia collided in a way the world would never forget. Congrats. If you're still here you've officially entered Puritan New England. The Salem witch trials, a true story of fear, faith, and hysteria. Between February 1692 and May 1693, the once peaceful Puritan colony of Massachusetts found itself engulfed in a tempest of fear and hysteria. What began as whispers of the supernatural soon spiraled into a frenzy that would forever alter the fabric of the community. In the shadow of the town's simple wooden structures and the stoic faces of its residents, over 200 individuals were accused of practicing witchcraft, an accusation that carried with it the weight of dire consequences. The atmosphere crackled with suspicion as neighbors turned against one another, and the very essence of trust was obliterated by the insidious lure of paranoia. Among the accused were men and women from all walks of life, but the majority were women whose very existence seemed to challenge the rigid moral codes of the time. The trials became a spectacle, a grim theater where the lives and fates of the accused hung in the balance. 30 souls were ultimately found guilty, their fates sealed by the fervent beliefs of a community gripped by fear. 19 of these individuals met their end on the gallows, their lives extinguished in a harrowing display of public execution. 14 women and 5 men, each one a victim of the collective madness that had taken hold of the colony. Among the most tragic of these stories was that of Giles Corey, an elderly man whose steadfastness in the face of such dread would become a haunting symbol of resistance. Refusing to enter a plea, he stood resolute, unwilling to submit to the farce of a trial that had already condemned so many. The authorities, desperate to extract a confession, resorted to barbaric measures, and Corey was subjected to the cruel punishment of pressing. Crushed beneath heavy stones, his last words reportedly a defiant protest against the injustice that enveloped him. As the trials progressed, the harsh reality of the situation became painfully evident. At least 5 more individuals languished in filthy, overcrowded jails, their lives reduced to mere shadows as they awaited their fate. These cramped, stifling cells, filled with the scent of despair and the echoes of anguished cries, served as a grim reminder of the fragility of existence in such tumultuous times. The specter of death loomed over them, an ever-present threat that rendered their hopes of justice a distant dream. Thus the Massachusetts Bay Colony, once a beacon of Puritan virtue and community, became a crucible of fear where innocence was sacrificed at the altar of superstition. The echoes of the witch trials would reverberate through the annals of history, leaving an indelible mark on the psyche of a nation. In the wake of such tragedy, questions of morality, justice, and the very nature of humanity itself would rise to the surface. forever altering the course of the community, and indeed, the world beyond its borders. It all began in Salem village, today known as Danvers. But soon, accusations spread across many other towns, including Como, Andover, Topsfield. People were dragged from their homes, their identities destroyed. Today, historians have traced about 151 of the accused, linking them to more 25 different New England communities. In the year 1692, a dark chapter unfolded in the quiet yet tumultuous town of Salem, a community gripped by fear and suspicion. The court of Oyer and Terminer was summoned, an ominous assembly of judges tasked with overseeing the witch trials that would soon become infamous throughout history. This court, with its stern demeanor and rigid protocols, became the harbinger of dread for many innocent souls. As the gavel struck for the first time, it echoed not just within the walls of the courtroom, but throughout the very fabric of a community that was already fraying under the weight of paranoia and superstition. Salem town, the regional center, was a place where whispers of witchcraft circulated like wildfire, igniting the imaginations of its residents and fueling a fervor that would soon consume them. The air was thick with tension as accusations flew like arrows, piercing the hearts of neighbors who had once shared laughter and companionship. It was here that the hangings took place, a grim spectacle that would mark a turning point in the lives of many. The gallows stood as a foreboding monument, casting long shadows over the town square, where once there had been community gatherings and the laughter of children. As the trials progressed, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged, a tempest of emotions swirling around the courtroom. The Superior Court of Judicature emerged in 1693, taking the reins from the previous court, yet the tide of hysteria showed no signs of abating. The judges, once seen as pillars of justice, now bore the weight of a desperate populace seeking scapegoats for their misfortunes. The testimonies became more feverish, the allegations more outrageous, and the line between reality and imagination blurred. Each day brought new accusations, new victims, and the chilling realization that anyone could find themselves ensnared in the web of suspicion. In total, 14 other women and 2 men met their tragic fate, executed for witchcraft in a grim tableau that would haunt the annals of history. These individuals, once vibrant members of their community, were now reduced to mere symbols of the fear that gripped the hearts of the people. As the gallows claimed its victims, the townsfolk were left to grapple with the consequences of their actions, torn between the desire for safety and the haunting realization of their shared guilt. In stark contrast, during the entire 17th century, only a handful of others, 14 other women and 2 men, were executed for witchcraft across the broader regions of Massachusetts and Connecticut. This staggering statistic underscored the intensity and tragedy of the Salem witch trials, which stood as the deadliest witch hunt in North American colonial history. The echoes of those trials resonate even today, a reminder of the perilous dance between fear and reason, and the devastating consequences when a community loses its way. Salem, once a place of hope and promise, became forever etched in history as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the darkness that can arise when fear reigns supreme. The tide turned when clergy began to question the use of spectral evidence. Dreams, visions, and ghostly accusations that could not be verified. The overwhelming number of people accused, including prominent citizens, began to raise doubt. The panic collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. In the years that followed the harrowing trials that had gripped the Massachusetts Bay Colony, a profound and unsettling truth began to emerge, casting a long shadow over the events that had unfolded. Several of the original accusers, predominantly teenage girls, came forth with confessions that would shake the very foundations of the community. They admitted with trembling voices that they had fabricated their claims, driven by a whirlwind of fear, manipulation, and the intoxicating power that came from being the center of such a tumultuous storm. These young girls, once celebrated as the harbingers of justice, now stood before their peers and families, burdened by the weight of their deceit. The trials, which had unfolded like a dark play, with accusations flying and innocent lives destroyed, began to be viewed through a different lens. By the year 1702, the Massachusetts General Court took a significant step towards rectifying the grave injustices that had transpired. In a landmark decision, they declared the trials unlawful, acknowledging the chaos that had ensued and the egregious wrongs that had been committed in the name of justice. This proclamation rippled through the community as the echoes of the past began to fade, replaced by a growing desire for healing and reconciliation. Yet the scars of those turbulent times ran deep. The pain and loss experienced by the accused lingered in the hearts and minds of the townsfolk. In 1711, in a further act of justice, the legislature passed a bill that sought to reverse the many wrongful convictions that had shattered lives and families. This bill was not merely a legal formality, it was a poignant acknowledgment of the humanity of the victims. It specifically mentioned 22 individuals by name, honoring their memory and restoring a measure of dignity to those who had suffered so grievously. As the community grappled with its collective guilt, the names of the wrongly accused began to be spoken of with reverence, their stories woven into the fabric of the town's history. The air was thick with the sorrow of lost lives, yet a flicker of hope emerged, a determination to learn from the past, to ensure that such a travesty would never again occur. The trials had been a testament to the fragility of reason and the depths of human folly, but they had also ignited a fire within the hearts of the people, urging them toward greater understanding and compassion. Thus the tale of the witch trials transformed from one of fear and betrayal into a narrative of redemption and reflection. As the years rolled on, the lessons learned from that dark chapter would serve as a guiding light, illuminating the path toward a more just and humane society, where the echoes of those who had suffered would forever remind the living of the importance of truth, empathy, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The Salem witch trials became one of the most infamous episodes of mass hysteria in American history. Though not unique, they were part of a broader, global phenomenon of witch hunts that in Europe alone killed tens of thousands. For America, the Salem events became a symbol, a dark warning against isolation, religious extremism, false accusations, and the breakdown of due process. Historian George Lincoln Burr, a man of profound insight and relentless curiosity, once remarked upon the complex tapestry of human history with a statement that echoed through the corridors of time. His words carried a weight that transcended mere academic discourse, illuminating the intricate interplay of ambition, conflict, and the unyielding quest for knowledge that has shaped civilizations. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Burr, with his keen analytical mind, delved into the forgotten annals of the past, seeking to unravel the mysteries that lay buried beneath layers of time and tradition. As he meticulously examined the chronicles of exploration and conquest, his passion for uncovering the truth became evident. Burr's exploration of the Age of Discovery was not merely an academic endeavor. It was a journey into the very heart of humanity's relentless spirit. He understood that the explorers of yore were not just adventurers driven by the lure of gold and glory, but also seekers of knowledge who ventured into the unknown, fueled by the insatiable desire to expand the horizons of human understanding. In his writings, Burr wove a narrative that painted vivid pictures of the high seas, where intrepid sailors braved tumultuous storms and uncharted waters in their quest for new lands. He captured the essence of their encounters with indigenous peoples, highlighting the profound cultural exchanges that occurred, sometimes leading to mutual enrichment, and at other times to tragic consequences. Burr's exploration of these relationships was not one-dimensional. He recognized the complexity of human interactions, acknowledging both the beauty and the brutality that often accompanied the collision of different worlds. As he reflected on the passage of time, Burr also examined the powerful forces that shaped historical events. He dissected the political machinations, the fervent ambitions of empires, and the relentless pursuit of power that characterized the era. His insightful analysis revealed how these dynamics influenced the course of history, leaving indelible marks on the very fabric of society. Burr's work served as a reminder that history is not a stagnant record of dates and events, but a living narrative, rich with lessons and insights that resonate through the ages. In the quiet solitude of his study, surrounded by books and maps, Burr became a conduit for the voices of the past. He sought to give life to the stories of those who came before, to honor their experiences, and to ensure that their struggles and triumphs would not be forgotten. His dedication to historical scholarship inspired a generation of historians and thinkers who would carry forth his legacy, continuing to explore the depths of our shared human experience. Ultimately, George Lincoln Burr's contributions to the field of history were not merely academic. They were an invitation to all of us to engage with the past, to learn from it, and to appreciate the intricate dance of humanity that unfolds over centuries. His reflections served as a powerful reminder that our understanding of history is ever evolving, shaped by new discoveries and perspectives, yet rooted in the timeless truths of our collective journey. Through his lens, we are encouraged to look beyond the surface, to delve deeper into the narratives that define us, and to recognize that every story, no matter how small, plays a vital role in the grand saga of human existence. The Salem witchcraft was the rock on which the New England theocracy shattered. Centuries later, the haunting echoes of the Salem witch trials still reverberate through the annals of history, casting long shadows over the lives of those who suffered unjustly during that dark chapter. In the year 1957, after decades of reflection and growing awareness, Massachusetts took a significant step towards redemption by formally absolving 6 victims of those infamous trials. This act, a long overdue acknowledgment of their innocence, was a beacon of hope for descendants who had carried the weight of the past. However, the journey to justice did not end there. In 2001, as the world began to confront its history with renewed vigor, 5 more individuals were exonerated, their names finally cleared of the taint of witchcraft and the unjust accusations that led to their untimely demise. Each exoneration was a small yet powerful victory, a testament to the resilience of truth and the enduring quest for justice amid the lingering shadows of fear and superstition. Yet, the most poignant moment came in 2022, a year that would forever be etched in the collective memory of those who championed the cause of the wrongfully accused. Elizabeth Johnson, Jr., the last of the convicted witches from Salem who had never been officially cleared, was finally exonerated. An extraordinary moment that arrived 329 years after her conviction. The weight of centuries hung in the air as her name was finally restored, a symbol of hope for all those who had suffered in silence. As the echoes of the past faded, the act of exoneration shone brightly, illuminating the path towards understanding and healing. The stories of these individuals serve as powerful reminders of the dangers of hysteria, the fragility of justice, and the enduring spirit of those who fought for recognition long after their voices had been silenced. The saga of the Salem witch trials, marked by fear and injustice, transformed into a narrative of redemption, illustrating humanity's capacity for growth and the unyielding pursuit of truth. In 2016, the University of Virginia's Gallows Hill Project confirmed the exact site where the 19 victims were executed. 1 year later, Van Proctor's Ledge Memorial was dedicated there in their honor. In the shadowy depths of the ancient forest, where the sun struggled to pierce through the dense canopy of emerald leaves, a legend began to unfold. It was the year 823 AD, a time when the world was still shrouded in mystery, and tales of valor and treachery danced on the lips of the wandering bards. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, and the whispers of the wind carried secrets older than the trees themselves. At the heart of this mystical woodland stood a colossal oak, its gnarled branches reaching out like the arms of a forgotten giant. Beneath its sprawling boughs, a young warrior named Alicia knelt, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. With each beat, the weight of her destiny pressed heavily upon her shoulders. She had been chosen, not by birthright, but by a prophecy that spoke of a savior who would rise in the hour of darkness. The people of her village had long feared the encroaching shadows, tales woven from the fabric of their nightmares, of the malevolent sorcerer, Malakar, who sought to envelop the world in despair. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue across the landscape, Alicia's thoughts turned to her family, her friends, and the life she had known. She had trained tirelessly in the art of combat, her skills honed under the stern gaze of her mentor, a legendary knight who had once stood against Malakar's dark forces. His lessons echoed in her mind, urging her to summon the courage that lay dormant within her. "You are more than the fears that bind you, Alicia," he had told her. "You are the hope that will light the way for others." With renewed resolve, she rose to her feet, the weight of her sword resting comfortably at her side. Its hilt bore intricate carvings, telling the tale of those who had wielded it before her, each notch a testament to a battle fought and won. Elasia could feel the power it held, a lingering connection to the countless warriors who had come before her, each one a flicker of light against the encroaching darkness. As she stepped away from the ancient oak, a shiver ran down her spine, a foreboding reminder of the trials that lay ahead. The path winding through the forest was fraught with peril, but Elasia pressed on, her senses heightened, attuned to the symphony of life around her. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the soft patter of unseen creatures echoed in the twilight. She could almost hear the heartbeat of the forest, a living entity that seemed to pulse in time with her own. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, revealing a clearing bathed in soft moonlight. In the center, a circle of stones stood sentinel, each one etched with runes that glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own pounding heart. Elasia approached the stones, feeling an inexplicable draw toward their ancient power. She knelt, placing her palms flat against the cool surface, and closed her eyes, allowing the essence of the forest to envelop her. "Great spirits of the earth," she whispered, her voice trembling with reverence, "I seek your guidance in this hour of need. Grant me the strength to confront Malakar and protect my people from his tyranny." The wind swirled around her, lifting her hair like the gentle caress of a lover, and for a fleeting moment she felt a surge of energy, an affirmation that she was not alone in her quest. With a deep breath, she opened her eyes, the determination within her ignited like a flame. The legends spoke of Malakar's dark fortress, a place hidden beyond the mountains, where shadows danced and despair reigned. She knew that to confront him, she would need allies, for no warrior could face such darkness alone. As the first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Elasia set forth on her journey. With each step, the weight of her mission settled into her bones, and the path ahead grew clearer. She would gather those who were willing to stand against the encroaching night, rallying not just warriors, but those with the heart to resist Malakar's chilling grip. As the sun climbed higher, igniting the world around her, Elasia felt a sense of purpose guiding her. With every heartbeat, she was no longer just a girl from a small village. She was a beacon of hope, destined to rise against the shadows. She would not falter, for she carried within her the spirit of the forest, the strength of her ancestors, and the unwavering resolve to change the course of fate. And so, with her sword glinting in the morning light, she ventured into the unknown, ready to forge her own legend. Background and global context. By the late 1600s, the fervor of witch trials that had swept through Europe was beginning to wane, leaving behind a complex tapestry of fear and superstition. Yet this ominous shadow found fertile ground in the New World, where colonial America was still grappling with its own identity. Amidst the vast, untamed wilderness, a different kind of hysteria began to flourish, fueled by the unease of a society still in its infancy, struggling against the unknown. In 1668, Joseph Glanville, a prominent English philosopher and a man of letters, penned the compelling treatise against modern Sadducism. In his work, he fervently argued for the existence of witches and spirits, asserting that they were not mere figments of imagination, but entities that danced in the shadows of reality. To deny their existence, he contended, was akin to dismissing the supernatural, a dangerous stance that could lead one to deny the very essence of God himself. Glanville's writings, imbued with passionate conviction, resonated deeply within the minds of those who sought to make sense of their chaotic world. His eloquent prose painted a vivid picture of the spiritual realm, one that was populated by malevolent forces vying for control over the mortal sphere. In the colonies, the intellectual torch carried by Glanville was further ignited by figures such as Cotton Mather, a minister whose own writings echoed the sentiments of his predecessor. Mather, too, was captivated by the idea of demonic forces lurking just beyond the veil of human perception. He wielded his pen with the fervor of a prophet, validating the belief in witchcraft and the supernatural in a society that was already rife with suspicion and fear. The specter of witchcraft loomed larger than ever, as Mather's rhetoric stirred the spirits of an audience, eager to blame their misfortunes on the unseen machinations of dark forces. As the colonial experience unfolded, the air thickened with tension. The trials that would characterize this period were not merely judicial proceedings. They were cataclysmic events that swept through towns like wildfire, igniting hysteria and paranoia. Each accusation was a spark that could incinerate lives as communities turned on one another, fueled by Glanville's and Mather's insistence on the reality of witches. The villagers, gripped by fear and a desperate need for scapegoats, began to see shadows where there were none, and the very fabric of society began to unravel. Thus the seeds of superstition, sown by the likes of Glanville and Mather, found a new home in the soil of colonial America, where the belief in witchcraft not only survived, but thrived, echoing the tumult of a time when the line between the natural and the supernatural was perilously thin. As the trials intensified, the echoes of their words reverberated through the streets, a clarion call for vigilance against the forces of darkness that they believed threatened to consume the very essence of their existence. The stage was set for a drama of epic proportions, as the innocent and the guilty alike danced on the precipice of hysteria, leaving a dark legacy that would haunt the new nation for generations to come. The sun had barely breached the horizon on that fateful day in late October, casting a soft, golden hue across the sleepy town of Willow Creek. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the distant echo of morning bird song. Yet beneath the surface of this picturesque morning, a storm was brewing. Whispers danced through the streets like restless spirits, and the atmosphere was thick with an unsettling tension that hinted at the chaos soon to unfold. In the heart of the town square, the townsfolk began to gather, their faces painted with curiosity and trepidation. News had spread like wildfire. A series of accusations aimed at the town's beloved mayor, Thomas Grayson, a man whose charm and charisma had won the hearts of many. The murmurs grew louder, fueled by a mix of disbelief and intrigue. How could this pillar of the community, a figure synonymous with integrity and goodwill, find himself at the center of such a scandal? As the clock struck 8, a nervous crowd encircled the town hall, their breaths mingling in the chilly air. It was not just the gravity of the accusations that weighed heavily upon them. It was the fear of what would happen next. A sense of foreboding hung over the gathering like a dark cloud, threatening to unleash a deluge of chaos and uncertainty. The mayor was accused of embezzlement, a betrayal that cut deep into the very fabric of trust that held Willow Creek together. Amid the crowd, Sarah Jenkins, a lifelong resident and the town's librarian, stood frozen in place. Her heart raced as she strained to hear the latest developments. The whispers had become more than just idle gossip. They were now filled with urgency and alarm. Memories flooded her mind. Thomas Grayson's tireless efforts to restore the town's dilapidated library, his commitment to enriching the lives of its citizens, and the countless community events he had spearheaded. How could such a man become embroiled in something so heinous? The mayor's supporters and detractors seemed to be divided into two camps, their emotions running high and the tension palpable. Some rallied behind him, passionately defending his character and contributions, while others seized the opportunity to voice long-held grievances, their voices tinged with anger and betrayal. Accusations flew like arrows, sharp and unyielding, piercing the heart of the community. The once united town now felt fractured, teetering on the brink of division as the narrative unfolded. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the town square, a figure emerged from the shadows of the town hall. It was Thomas Grayson himself, his face drawn and weary, yet still exuding an air of dignity. He raised a hand to quell the crowd. The silence that followed filled with an electric anticipation. The moment was monumental. All eyes were fixed on him, seeking the truth behind the storm of accusations. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. "I stand before you today, not just as your mayor, but as a man who has dedicated his life to serving this community. I am here to address the rumors that have cast a shadow over our shared home." His words hung in the air, heavy with both promise and peril, as he prepared to unravel the tangled web of accusations that threatened to engulf him. With each word he spoke, the tension thickened, the crowd leaning in, eager to grasp every detail. He spoke of integrity, of his commitment to transparency, and the unyielding love he held for Willow Creek. Yet, in the depths of his heart, he knew that the truth was a fragile thing, easily lost in the tumult of fear and suspicion that had gripped the town. The stakes were high, and as he continued to address the accusations head-on, the eyes of the community bore into him, searching for reassurance amidst the chaos. Though the sun shone brightly now, casting long shadows across the square, there was a growing sense that this moment was just the beginning of something far more profound. The ground beneath them felt unstable, as if the very foundations of their lives were shifting. Would the truth emerge unscathed, or would the once vibrant community of Willow Creek be forever altered by the weight of betrayal and doubt? All that remained was the unfolding of fate, an epic tale that was just beginning to be written, with each heart in the crowd playing a role in the saga of accusation, loyalty, and the relentless quest for truth. The trials began when Betty Paris, 9, and Eddie Abigail Williams, 11, daughter and niece of Reverend Samuel Paris, began suffering fits, screaming, contorting, crawling under furniture, and speaking in tongues. A doctor, unable to find a natural cause, blamed witchcraft. As the chilling winds of late winter swept through the village, the tight-knit community of Salem found itself grappling with an unseen terror. The whispers of fear began to echo through the streets, casting a shadow over the lives of its inhabitants. Soon, more girls joined the ranks of those afflicted. Among them was the precocious Ann Putnam, Jr., barely 12 years old. With wide, frightened eyes that seemed to reflect the haunted world around her. Alongside her was the slightly older Elizabeth Hubbard, aged 17. A striking figure whose expression carried the weight of an unsettling awareness that belied her youth. As they congregated, the air thickened with tension, crackling like the dry leaves of autumn beneath their feet. The once innocent laughter of childhood faded, replaced by an atmosphere of dread and uncertainty. The symptoms that had initially seemed like mere quibbles transformed into a terrifying spectacle. Violent fits that seized their bodies without warning, leaving them contorted in agony. Their cries pierced the stillness of the night, a heart-wrenching symphony of despair that sent chills down the spines of those who bore witness. Pinching became a common ritual among the afflicted, each jab of fingers a desperate grasp at normalcy. But the grip of the unseen force was relentless. Choking, too, claimed its victims, as if a spectral hand had tightened around their throats, squeezing the breath of life from their lungs. Hallucinations danced behind their eyelids, vivid and tormenting, dragging them into a nightmarish realm where reality blurred with the supernatural. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, whispering secrets only they could hear, while the faces of friends and family twisted into grotesque masks of malice. The village, once a sanctuary of peace, became a cauldron of paranoia. Families huddled together, casting wary glances at one another, wondering who might be next to succumb to the madness. The air grew heavy with accusations, fingers pointing in every direction as the girl's symptoms intensified, drawing the community into a vortex of fear and suspicion. Each day brought new tales of horror, and with each tale, the legend of their plight grew, entwining their fates with the very fabric of Salem itself. In this dark chapter of their lives, Anne and Elizabeth stood at the forefront, their youthful spirits battered but unbroken. They were not merely victims. They were the harbingers of a storm that would soon engulf the village, a storm that would challenge the very foundations of belief and reason. The violent episodes continued to escalate, leaving a trail of bewilderment and anguish in their wake as the townsfolk struggled to comprehend the unfathomable nature of their suffering. With every convulsion, every gasp for air, the line between the living and the spectral blurred, plunging Salem into a harrowing saga that would be etched into the annals of history. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a blood-red hue across the sky, the girls stood together, united in their torment, as an eerie silence wrapped around them, foreshadowing the dark days that lay ahead. The wheels of fate were set in motion, and as the shadows deepened, so too did the chilling reality of their shared experience. The first accused were 3 women, in the shadowy corners of a small Puritan settlement, where the air was thick with suspicion and the chill of an unforgiving winter, lived 3 women whose lives would soon intertwine in a tale marked by fear and misunderstanding. Among them was Sarah Good, a destitute beggar whose presence in the village was as unwelcome as the biting cold that gnawed at the townsfolk. With tattered clothes clinging to her frail frame and wild, unkempt hair framing her weathered face, she wandered the streets, muttering curses under her breath. The townspeople, wary of her unpredictable behavior, whispered about her incessantly, casting her as a harbinger of misfortune. Her eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 grievances, and many believed that when she spoke, it was not mere words, but an invocation of the dark forces that lurked just beyond the edge of their understanding. Then there was Sarah Osborne, a woman who had long defied the rigid social norms of the community. With an air of quiet defiance, she had chosen to remarry, breaking the constraints of widowhood by uniting with a servant, a choice that raised eyebrows and drew scorn from the pious villagers. Isolated by her decisions, Sarah lived in a world of her own making, retreating into the shadows of her home, where the whispers of the townsfolk could not reach her. She embraced her autonomy fiercely, yet the isolation weighed heavily upon her spirit. The flickering candlelight of her modest dwelling often danced against the walls, casting shadows that seemed to reflect her inner turmoil. In her heart, she yearned for acceptance, but the walls of her life were built from the very choices that set her apart. And then there was Tituba, an enslaved woman from the West Indies, whose presence in the village added an exotic layer to the already charged atmosphere. With a skin kissed by the sun and a spirit that sparkled with tales of magic and mystery, she became a figure of fascination and fear. Tituba wove stories of enchantments and spirits, drawing from her rich cultural heritage, captivating the minds of the curious and the fearful alike. Her laughter was often a melody that floated through the air, yet beneath it lay an undercurrent of sorrow and resilience. The children, wide-eyed and innocent, gathered around her, eager to listen as she spun yarns of mystical creatures and powerful spells, but the adults, gripped by their own superstitions, viewed her tales with trepidation. As the winter deepened, the town found itself in the grip of paranoia. Strange occurrences began to plague the villagers. Livestock fell ill, crops withered unexpectedly, and the harsh cold seemed to bite deeper than ever before. In this cauldron of fear, Sarah Good's mutterings took on a sinister quality. Her curses, once dismissed as the ramblings of a beggar, now echoed in the minds of the townsfolk as portents of doom. They began to connect the misfortunes that befell them with her presence, painting her as the witch who cursed their very land. At the same time, Sarah Osborne's defiance only deepened the divide. The reclusive woman, who had dared to live on her own terms, became the target of gossip and accusation. As whispered rumors about her unconventional marriage spread like wildfire, the flames of suspicion grew hotter, casting shadows over her once quiet existence. The townspeople, eager to find a scapegoat for their troubles, looked upon her with wary eyes, convinced that her defiance against societal norms must surely be linked to the dark forces they feared. Tituba, caught in the midst of this tempest, became an unwilling conduit for the village's mounting hysteria. Her stories, once a source of joy and wonder, turned into the very fuel that ignited the flames of paranoia. Faced with the growing tide of fear, she found herself thrust into a role she never sought, a figure of accusation, a bearer of blame. The tales she spun, meant to entertain and enchant, were twisted into something sinister, casting her as a witch in the eyes of the frightened villagers who sought to explain their misfortunes. In these intertwining fates, the three women, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, stood at the center of a storm that would ripple through the fabric of their lives and the community itself. bound together by the threads of suspicion, fear, and the quest for understanding. They would soon find themselves caught in a web of accusations that transcended their individual struggles, shaping the very identity of the town and etching their names into the annals of history. Tituba confessed. Her stories of flying spirits, demonic pacts, and a dark figure with a book ignited the panic. More arrests followed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow that illuminated the sprawling landscape of the valley below. This was no ordinary evening. It marked a turning point in the lives of those who called this land home. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to swirl around the villagers as they gathered in the central square. Each face was etched with a mixture of hope and trepidation, for they were on the cusp of a moment that would shape their destinies. Amidst the crowd, a figure stood tall, his silhouette framed by the fading light. This was Elian, a young man whose spirit was as fierce as the wind that rustled the leaves of the ancient oaks lining the square. His hair, dark as the night sky, danced with the breeze, and his eyes sparkled with a determination that ignited the hearts of those around him. Elian had long been regarded as a dreamer, but today he was ready to embrace his fate. He had spent countless nights poring over the legends passed down through generations, tales of heroes and battles fought for the very soul of their land. Now, it was his turn to step into the annals of history. The villagers gathered closer, their whispers forming a chorus of encouragement that pulsed through the air. Among them stood his childhood friend, Lyra, whose bright spirit and unwavering loyalty had always stood by him. With hair like spun gold and a smile that could brighten the darkest of days, she had been his steadfast ally in every adventure. As their eyes met, a silent understanding passed between them. They both knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. At the heart of the square, an ancient stone pedestal loomed, its surface etched with intricate carvings that spoke of times long past. It had been a place of significance where decisions were made and destinies intertwined. Tonight, it held a different purpose. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Elian stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The villagers fell silent, their collective breath held in anticipation of what was to come. With a voice that resonated through the stillness, Elian recounted the tales of their ancestors, stories of bravery and sacrifice that had woven the fabric of their community. He spoke of the trials they had faced, the darkness that had threatened to engulf them, and the unwavering spirit that had seen them through. As he spoke, the weight of his words settled over the crowd like a warm blanket, igniting the flickering flames of courage within each heart. But this night was not just a remembrance. It was a call to action. Elian's voice grew stronger as he articulated the threats that loomed on the horizon, dangers that sought to tear apart the very foundation of their lives. Whispers of encroaching darkness had reached their ears, tales of a force that sought to extinguish the light of hope. It was a force that could not be ignored, a shadow that threatened to swallow them whole. As the last notes of his speech hung in the air, Elian raised his arm, a gesture of unity and defiance. "We are not mere shadows in the night," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "We are the bearers of our own fate. Together, we will rise against the darkness. Together, we will fight for our home." The villagers erupted into cheers, their voices blending into a symphony of determination that echoed off the walls of the ancient buildings surrounding them. It was a moment charged with energy, as if the very earth beneath their feet had come alive. Lyra stepped beside Elian, her eyes gleaming with pride, and together they faced the crowd, two warriors bound by friendship and purpose. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast expanse above, a new chapter unfolded before them, one filled with challenges and triumphs yet to be written. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but in that moment they were united, a tapestry of strength woven from the threads of their shared resolve. They would embark on this quest not just for themselves, but for every soul in the valley, for every dream yet to be realized. And so, with the night stretching out before them, they prepared to embrace the unknown, a band of heroes ready to carve their legacy into the fabric of time. The journey would be long and arduous, but with hearts ablaze and spirits unyielding, they would face whatever trials awaited them, for they were more than just a village. They were a force to be reckoned with, and their story was just beginning. Chaos spreads. In the bleak and turbulent days of March 1692, the air in Salem village hung heavy with tension and suspicion. Whispers of witchcraft slithered through the narrow streets like a chilling wind, igniting fears that gripped the hearts of the townsfolk. Among those caught in the storm of unreason were respected church members, pillars of the community, whose very presence had long been synonymous with virtue and integrity. Martha Corey, a woman known for her wisdom and kindness, found herself ensnared in the web of hysteria, her reputation tarnished by the insidious accusations that flew about like the crows circling over the gallows. The village, once a sanctuary of faith, now teetered on the brink of madness. Rebecca Nurse, a matriarch revered for her piety and gentle spirit, also faced the dark tide of accusation. Her name, once spoken with admiration, became a harbinger of dread, as fear-maddened neighbors turned against her, swayed by the feverish claims of witchcraft that spread like wildfire. The very fabric of community trust began to unravel, as friends and families found themselves divided by a fear that knew no bounds. The hearts of men and women, once united in fellowship, now pulsed with suspicion and betrayal. As the sun cast long shadows over the village, innocence itself appeared to be on trial. In a most heartbreaking twist of fate, even the innocent were not spared. Little Dorothy Good, a mere 4-year-old child, was seized and thrown into the dank, dark confines of a prison. Her tiny form trembled in fear as the harsh realities of the world encroached upon her fragile existence. The sight of such a young soul, caught in the throes of a cruel frenzy, served as a stark reminder of the depths to which humanity could sink when consumed by unfounded fears. In nearby Ipswich, the tide of hysteria surged forth, capturing yet another victim. Rachel Clinton, a woman of quiet demeanor, found herself arrested under the weight of unfounded allegations, her fate now entwined with the growing chaos. The news of her imprisonment rippled through the region, stoking the fires of paranoia that had already engulfed Salem. Neighbors looked askance at one another, eyes narrowed with suspicion, as the specter of witchcraft loomed large, overshadowing the bonds of kinship that had once flourished in their hearts. As the days of March wore on, the darkening clouds of accusation gathered strength, threatening to engulf the very essence of their community. The fevered imaginations of the townsfolk spiraled into a collective nightmare, where reason was cast aside as easily as a discarded garment. The names of the accused echoed through the streets, each utterance steeped in fear and desperation, marking them as pariahs in a world that had once embraced them. Thus, in this tempest of hysteria, the lives of Martha Corey, Rebecca Nurse, Dorothy Good, and Rachel Clinton became entwined in a tragic tapestry woven from the threads of fear, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of scapegoats. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow upon the village, it became painfully clear that the shadows of doubt would take root and flourish, leaving scars that would mar the community for generations to come. The courts looked for witches' marks, moles or blemishes believed to be where the devil had suckled. Confessions were coerced, hysteria fed upon itself. In the heart of a sprawling kingdom, where towering mountains pierced the heavens and lush valleys cradled ancient secrets, a hero's journey was about to unfold. The year was 1279, and the air was thick with anticipation as whispers of an impending darkness began to ripple through villages like a chilling breeze. A shadow loomed, threatening to envelop the land in despair, and the people looked toward their bravest warrior, a young knight named Elysian. Elysian was not born into nobility, nor was he favored by fortune. Rather, he was forged in the fires of adversity. Raised in a humble village at the edge of the Eldrin forest, he had learned the ways of survival early on. His father, a blacksmith, taught him the art of crafting weapons, while his mother, a healer, instilled in him a deep respect for life and the natural world. With every clang of the hammer and every whispered incantation of healing, Elysian's spirit grew stronger, his resolve more unyielding. He was a tapestry woven from the threads of hardship and hope. As the signs of trouble intensified, crops withering under a scorching sun and livestock falling ill, Elysian felt the weight of his destiny pressing upon him. The council of elders summoned him, their faces drawn and grim as they spoke of a dark sorcerer who had risen in the north. This malevolent figure, known only as Malakar, had summoned a horde of shadowy creatures, unleashing chaos upon the land. Elysian listened intently, his heart pounding like a war drum, for he understood that the fate of his homeland rested upon his shoulders. With a heart full of determination, Elysian donned his armor, its gleaming surface reflecting the flickering flames of the forge. He grasped the hilt of his sword, a weapon imbued with the strength of his ancestors and the wisdom of the ages. As he set forth on his quest, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue across the landscape. The path ahead was fraught with peril, yet Elysian felt a surge of courage. He was not alone, for the spirit of his people walked beside him. The journey was long and treacherous, winding through the dense, whispering woods of Eldrin and across rugged mountains where the air grew thin. Each step brought him closer to the heart of darkness, but the memories of his village, the laughter of children, the warmth of shared meals, the strength of community, fueled his resolve. Along the way he encountered allies, a fierce warrior maiden named Lyara, whose skill with a bow was unmatched, a wise old sage named Thalos, whose knowledge of the arcane arts proved invaluable, and a humble bard, whose songs lifted their spirits and reminded them of the beauty worth fighting for. Together, this unlikely fellowship forged bonds that transcended their differences. They fought through fierce storms and evaded traps set by Malakar's minions, each challenge strengthening their camaraderie. They shared stories by the campfire, laughter mingling with the crackling flames, forging a family that would not be easily broken. And as they drew ever closer to the sorcerer's dark fortress, a towering edifice of jagged stone and swirling shadows, the weight of their mission pressed heavily upon them. At last, they stood before the fortress, a manifestation of despair and dread. Its gates loomed like the maw of a great beast, and a palpable darkness emanated from within. Elysian felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered the faces of those who depended on him. With a resolute heart, he led his companions forward, determination etched into every line of his face. The battle that ensued was nothing short of epic. As they breached the gates, they were met with waves of shadow creatures, their forms writhing like smoke in the wind. Elysian fought valiantly, his sword dancing in the flickering torchlight, each stroke infused with the hope and strength of his people. Lyara's arrows sang through the air, striking true, while Thalos summoned radiant energy that illuminated the shadows, dispelling fear and instilling courage. Amidst the chaos, Elysian finally faced Malakar, a figure draped in darkness, whose eyes glowed with malice. Their clash echoed like thunder, a battle of light against shadow, where every blow reverberated with the cries of the innocent. Elysian drew upon every lesson learned, every friend made, and every sacrifice endured. With a final mighty roar, he struck true, shattering the sorcerer's dark magic and freeing the land from his grasp. As the dust settled, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, illuminating the land with a golden light. The shadows that once clung to the earth began to dissolve, and life surged back into the kingdom. Elysian stood victorious, surrounded by his friends, each of them a testament to the strength found in unity and courage. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, bound by their shared journey and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Thus the tale of Elysian and his companions became legend, woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. The people celebrated, their hearts lifted by the hope that had been rekindled, and as Elysian returned home, he carried with him not just the glory of victory, but the profound understanding that true strength lies not in power alone, but in the bonds forged in the fires of adversity. A deeper divide. Salem village was already a powder keg, a community teetering on the brink of chaos. For years, simmering disputes over land, taxes, and church leadership had created an atmosphere thick with distrust and resentment. The villagers, once united in their shared beliefs and common goals, now found themselves divided by fervent disagreements and personal grievances. This tension was palpable, as neighbors eyed one another with suspicion, and whispered accusations spread like wildfire through the narrow dirt paths that wound through the settlement. At the heart of Salem's turmoil was Reverend Samuel Parris, the latest in a long line of ministers who had failed to unify the congregation. His arrival had coincided with a period of heightened strife, and instead of mending the rifts within the community, he seemed to exacerbate them. Parris was a man driven by a zealous conviction, believing that he alone held the moral compass for his flock. He openly called out sin, urging his parishioners to repent and adhere strictly to his interpretation of righteousness. His fervor, however, was met with resistance. Many villagers found his demands for strict adherence to Scripture and his calls for land ownership burdensome and invasive, leading to a growing enmity that hung over the village like a dark cloud. Paris's insistence on moral purity and his contentious relationship with the townsfolk ignited old grievances. He became embroiled in disputes over property lines and taxes, often siding with those who supported his leadership, while alienating others who felt marginalized. As tensions flared, friendships soured, and the threads that once bound the community together began to unravel. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, as if the very ground beneath their feet could ignite at any moment. Amidst this brewing storm, the Reverend's own family became entangled in the chaos. His daughter, Betty, and his niece, Abigail, were the first to make a shocking claim that would set the village ablaze with fear and suspicion. Stricken by mysterious ailments, the two girls began to exhibit strange behaviors, their bodies contorting and their voices rising in anguished cries. In a moment of desperation, they accused others in the village of witchcraft, unleashing a torrent of paranoia that would engulf Salem. Their cries reverberated through the community, sowing seeds of fear that took root and flourished in the fertile ground of distrust. The accusations spread rapidly as the villagers, already on edge, began to turn on one another with alarming speed. Friends became foes, and neighbors found themselves ensnared in a web of accusations. Once trivial disputes over land and taxes were overshadowed by the urgent need to root out the supposed evil lurking among them. The spirit of fellowship and community was eclipsed by a rising tide of hysteria, as the villagers scrambled to protect themselves from the encroaching darkness. In this atmosphere of fear, the Reverend stood at the center, both a catalyst and a shield. He fanned the flames of accusation, emboldening those who sought to rid the village of what they perceived as a malignant force. The very fabric of Salem village, once woven from the threads of shared belief and understanding, began to unravel, giving way to a narrative of suspicion and scapegoating that would haunt the community for years to come. The stage was set for a tragic unfolding of events, as the people of Salem found themselves caught in a maelstrom of their own making, driven by fear, resentment, and the desperate need to find someone to blame. Add to this a colonial government in chaos. In 1684, the Massachusetts Charter was revoked. King James II was overthrown, and the William and Mary took the throne. The colony lacked a clear government for years. When Governor William Phips arrived in May 1692, one of his first acts was to establish the Court of Oyer and Terminer to deal with the swelling number of witchcraft cases. In the year 1676, the colony found itself ensnared in a web of turmoil, a tempest of fear and uncertainty that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of their existence. The air was thick with tension as ominous clouds gathered on the horizon, heralding the chaos that was to come. To the north, Native American raids surged like a relentless tide, each attack a stark reminder of the fragile peace that had once allowed settlers to dream of a brighter future. These raids were not mere skirmishes. They were fierce and calculated, striking fear into the hearts of the colonists who had already endured so much. At the same time, a flood of refugees streamed in from Maine, their faces etched with desperation and loss. They came bearing harrowing tales of destruction, recounting how their homes had been reduced to ashes and their loved ones taken from them in the dead of night. The colony's borders, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison encircled by an ever-growing threat. Each newcomer added to the tension, their stories intertwining with the collective anxiety that gripped the settlers. The once thriving community found itself overwhelmed, struggling to accommodate the influx of souls who had been uprooted from their homes. Amidst this turmoil lingered the haunting memories of King Philip's War, a brutal conflict that had left scars both visible and unseen. The reverberations of its violence echoed through the minds of those who had lived through it, a grim reminder of how quickly peace could dissolve into bloodshed. The specter of loss loomed large, as families mourned the absence of fathers, brothers, and sons who had perished in the struggle. The very ground they walked upon was imbued with the weight of their grief, each step a painful reminder of what had been sacrificed. Fear was everywhere, a palpable force that seeped into the hearts of the settlers, twisting their thoughts and fueling their imaginations. Shadows danced ominously in the flickering light of their hearths, and every rustle in the underbrush was met with anxious glances and whispered prayers. Children clung to their mothers, while fathers gripped their tools and weapons with a sense of foreboding, ready for an impending storm that seemed to loom closer with each passing day. As night fell, the colony transformed into a place of hushed voices and guarded glances. Stories of valor and bravery were shared around the flickering flames, each tale a fragile thread of hope woven into the fabric of their despair. Yet even as they sought solace in each other's company, the shadows remained, lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. The settlers were forced to grapple not only with the external threats that encircled them, but also with the internal turmoil that threatened to unravel their very community. In this crucible of fear and uncertainty, the spirit of the colony was tested like never before. The struggle for survival became intertwined with the fight for identity, as the settlers faced the hardest of choices, to stand firm against the tides of chaos, or to succumb to the overwhelming darkness that sought to engulf them. Each heart beat with the hope of a new dawn, yet the shadows of the past loomed large, casting long, dark silhouettes over their dreams of peace. In the heart of the 17th century, a time when the winds of change swept across the New World, the Puritan community emerged as a formidable force, driven by the fervent belief in their vision of a godly society. They clung to their ideals with a tenacity that often bordered on fanaticism, viewing the world through a lens of binary morality, good versus evil, salvation versus damnation. This mindset was deeply ingrained in their daily lives and dictated their interactions, especially concerning women, whose roles were often relegated to the shadows of subservience and silence. In this rigid society, women were seen as vessels of temptation, fragile yet formidable, their very existence a reflection of the fall. The Puritans held that Eve's transgression cast a long shadow over all women, branding them as inherently sinful. This belief fueled a culture steeped in misogyny, where the duality of reverence and disdain for women was palpable. Women were expected to embody virtue and piety, yet were constantly scrutinized for any hint of independence or defiance. Their worth was measured by their ability to conform to the expectations of motherhood and domesticity, leaving little room for personal ambition or desire. As the puritanical doctrine spread across the colonies, it seeped into every aspect of life, dictating everything from social interactions to legal structures. The Church, acting as the moral compass of the community, wielded immense power over the lives of individuals, particularly women. The pulpit echoed with sermons that reinforced the notion of female inferiority, urging congregants to uphold the sanctity of the family by keeping women in their prescribed roles. The consequences of stepping outside these bounds could be severe, leading to public shaming or even accusations of witchcraft, a fate reserved for those who dared to challenge the status quo. In the small, tightly knit settlements, the specter of witch hunts loomed large. The infamous Salem witch trials of 1692 serve as a stark example of this hysteria, a culmination of the fears and anxieties that pervaded Puritan society. Women like Tituba, Sarah Good, and Rebecca Nurse found themselves ensnared in a web of suspicion and scapegoating, their fates irrevocably altered by the prevailing misogyny. The trials were not merely a battle against perceived evil, but a manifestation of the deep-seated fears that women's voices and agency posed to the established order. Amid these turbulent times, the few women who dared to assert themselves, whether through literature, religious dissent, or political action, faced immense challenges. Figures like Anne Bradstreet, the first published female poet in America, navigated the treacherous waters of creativity and expression, producing works that subtly challenged the patriarchal norms. Yet even her verses, celebrated for their beauty and depth, were often tempered by the expectations of her role as a wife and mother, illustrating the delicate balance women had to maintain between their desires and societal demands. The Puritan belief system, while fostering a community committed to righteousness and moral rectitude, ultimately suffocated individuality and stifled the voices of half its population. The echoes of this misogyny reverberated through the generations, shaping the cultural landscape of America and leaving an indelible mark on the fabric of society. As the New World continued to evolve, the struggle for women's rights and recognition would eventually rise to the forefront, challenging the very foundations of the beliefs that had sought to confine them. Thus, the story of the Puritans is not just one of piety and perseverance, but also a cautionary tale of the destructive power of rigid ideologies that diminish the human spirit. Even as the sun set on the 17th century, casting long shadows over the past, the seeds of change had been sown, heralding a future where the voices of women could no longer be silenced. The reverberations of that struggle would echo through time, as the fight for equality and recognition would become a defining narrative in the unfolding story of America. The Puritans believed Satan walked among them, looking for weak souls. Women were especially vulnerable, considered morally weaker, more emotional, and more easily tempted. Over 78% of the accused were women, especially that are unmarried, childless, or socially isolated. Women. In the shadowy recesses of a world gripped by fear and superstition, some individuals found themselves ensnared in a harrowing dilemma. The specter of witchcraft loomed large over society, casting a pall of paranoia that twisted the very fabric of everyday life. Among the townsfolk, whispers of consorting with the devil echoed like haunting refrains, each utterance laden with dread and foreboding. Yet what many did not realize was that these confessions often bore the weight of desperation rather than truth. For in this perilous landscape, where the line between innocence and guilt blurred, a confession could become a lifeline, a chance for pardon and reintegration into a community that had turned its back on so many. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across cobblestone streets, the air thickened with tension. Those accused of witchcraft faced a grim reality, the choice between risking their lives in a deadly game of denial or clinging to the fragile hope of salvation through admission. The stakes were unimaginably high. Denial was perceived not merely as an assertion of innocence, but as an open invitation to the gallows, where the condemned would meet their grim fate. The gallows creaked ominously in the distance, a chilling reminder of the consequences that awaited those who dared to stand firm against the rising tide of accusations. In dimly lit halls where the courts convened, the atmosphere crackled with an unsettling energy. Judges, fueled by a potent mix of zeal and fear, wielded their authority like a sword, ready to strike down anyone who might threaten the social order. The accused, trembling in their shackles, were often left with no recourse but to surrender to the tide of public hysteria. They saw the fate of their neighbors, those who had refused to confess, whose stubbornness had led them to the noose. In that moment of agonizing clarity, many chose to utter the words that would seal their fate, confessing to dark pacts with malevolent forces they had never known. As they confessed, their voices trembled with a mix of relief and regret, as though shedding the weight of their lies even as they embraced a grim reality. The confessions became a twisted form of salvation, a desperate bid for mercy that echoed through the chambers of power. Those who had walked the path of darkness, even if only in the fevered imaginations of the accusing mob, were often granted a reprieve from the ultimate punishment. The community, hungry for closure and eager to cleanse itself of perceived evil, often embraced these confessions as truth, allowing the confessors to step back into the light of society, even if it was a light tinged with the shadows of their own complicity. In the end, the tragic irony lay in the fact that the very act of confessing to the unthinkable, of acknowledging a bond with the devil, could restore one's place in a society so quick to cast aside those deemed guilty. The confessor emerged from the dark trial transformed, a reluctant survivor navigating the treacherous waters of acceptance amidst the echoes of their own betrayal. Yet, the lingering weight of the confession hung heavy in the air, a reminder that in a world ruled by fear, the line between salvation and damnation was perilously thin, and the price of survival could be one's very soul. Quarrels between neighbors often led to accusations. Abigail Faulkner, for example, admitted to being angry at her neighbors and said the devil may have briefly overtaken her. In the heart of an ancient realm, where the sun dipped low behind towering mountains, casting long shadows over the sprawling valleys below, a time-worn tale began to unfold. This was a land rich with legends, whispering through the winds that danced along the rugged cliffs and winding rivers, where the air was thick with the scent of pine and the promise of adventure lingered like a distant echo. It was a time when kingdoms rose and fell, where heroes were forged in the crucible of battle, and destiny wove its intricate tapestry with threads of both glory and despair. Amidst this backdrop of grandeur and peril, the year 480 AD marked a pivotal moment in the annals of history. The once mighty Roman Empire, which had cast its long shadow across the known world, was now a crumbling edifice of its former self. The echoes of legions marching in perfect unison had been replaced by the disarray of tribes and clans, each vying for dominion over the remnants of a once unified land. The very fabric of society was fraying, and in this chaos, a glimmer of hope flickered in the form of a young warrior named Aurelius. Aurelius was no ordinary fighter. He was the embodiment of the spirit of his people. With hair the color of sunlit wheat and eyes that sparkled like the azure skies, he was destined for greatness. Raised in a small village that nestled at the foot of the craggy hills, he had spent his youth listening to the stories of valor and sacrifice told by the village elders around flickering fires. His heart swelled with pride as he heard the legendary battles that had shaped their ancestors' destinies, each tale igniting a fierce desire within him to carve his own legacy into the annals of time. But as the tides of fate would have it, darkness loomed on the horizon. The once harmonious tribes were fracturing, their bonds threatened by the encroaching forces of a ruthless warlord who sought to unify the scattered remnants of the land under his iron fist. This warlord, known only as Varian, was a figure shrouded in terror and ambition, his name whispered in fear throughout the villages. With a heart as cold as the steel he wielded, Varian commanded a legion of mercenaries, each more vicious than the last. His eyes burned with the desire for power, and his ambition knew no bounds. As the sun rose on the fateful day of conflict, the air crackled with tension. Villagers gathered, their faces etched with worry and determination, as they prepared to defend their homes against the impending onslaught. Aurelius felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy upon him, a mantle he was both eager and fearful to embrace. Strapping on his armor, a gleaming reflection of the sun's brilliance, he felt the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, an echo of the generations that had come before him. With each step towards the battlefield, he could hear the heartbeat of his people, a rhythmic song of valor that urged him onward. The clash of steel rang out like thunder as the two forces collided on the open fields, a violent ballet of chaos and courage. Aurelius fought with the ferocity of a lion, his sword dancing through the air with precision and grace. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the thrill of battle igniting his spirit as he faced off against Varian's ruthless warriors. They came at him like a tidal wave, but he stood firm, embodying the hope of his people. As the sun reached its zenith, the tide of battle shifted. Aurelius found himself face to face with Varian, the warlord's presence as imposing as a storm cloud ready to burst. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still. The world around them faded into a blur, leaving only the two of them, warriors bound by fate, each representing the will of their people. Aurelius could feel the weight of his ancestors urging him forward, the legacy of every fallen hero whispering in his ear. With a battle cry that echoed across the field, Aurelius surged forward, their swords clashing with a force that sent shock waves through the air. The world around them erupted into chaos once more, but within that maelstrom there was a singular focus, a drive that propelled Aurelius forward. He fought not just for himself, but for every soul who had ever dared to dream of a brighter future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the battlefield, victory hung in the balance. Though the outcome remained uncertain, Aurelius stood resolute, a beacon of hope amid the darkness. The echoes of battle would soon fade, but the legend of that fateful day would resonate through the ages, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a young warrior who dared to challenge fate. In that moment, he understood that it was not merely the clash of swords that defined a hero, but the courage to stand against the tide of despair and fight for the dreams of future generations. Thus the saga continued, woven into the very fabric of time, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Cotton Mather's influence. In the late 17th century, a fervent belief in the supernatural gripped the hearts and minds of the people of Boston, and none were more captivated by these dark mysteries than Reverend Cotton Mather. A man of the cloth with a sharp intellect, Mather dedicated himself to the exploration of the spectral world, wielding his pen with both zeal and trepidation. In 1689, he published a compelling account in his book, Memorable Providences, which would forever mark the pages of history with its chilling narrative. Within the pages of this tome, Mather recounted a particularly harrowing tale that riveted the community, the plight of the Goodwin children. These innocent souls, who once frolicked in the sun-drenched fields of their youth, found themselves ensnared in a web of terror. Their misfortunes began after a bitter conflict with a local woman named Goody Glover, a Catholic washerwoman whose very name became synonymous with malevolence. The air was thick with suspicion, and whispers of witchcraft danced through the streets like shadows at dusk. As the Goodwin children succumbed to mysterious ailments, their bodies became vessels for unimaginable suffering. Mather, with his keen eye for detail and fervent belief in the supernatural, described their torment in vivid strokes. The children were plagued by fits that twisted their bodies in unnatural contortions, leaving them gasping and writhing on the ground. Their eyes, once bright with the spark of youth, now reflected a haunting terror as they shouted curses into the ether, their voices tinged with an otherworldly timbre that sent shivers down the spines of those who witnessed the spectacle. Mather meticulously documented each sign of possession, his words painting a picture of a household plunged into chaos. The children would cry out in anguish, their small bodies convulsing as if under the grip of some unseen force. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the cacophony of despair, their faces pale with fear. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices barely above a tremor, as they speculated about the sinister influence of Goody Glover. It was a time of great unease, where the boundaries of the natural world blurred with the supernatural, and the specter of witchcraft loomed large. As the tale unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the children's afflictions mirrored the very symptoms that would later erupt in the infamous Salem witch trials. Mather's account served as a foreboding prelude to the hysteria that would sweep through the Puritan community, igniting a fervor that would lead to accusations and executions. The chilling connection between the Goodwin children and the dark forces that haunted their lives would linger in the minds of the townsfolk, planting the seeds of fear that would blossom into a full-blown witch hunt. In the end, Goody Glover was condemned, a scapegoat for the community's collective dread. Her execution, hanging from the gallows, marked a tragic chapter in the annals of history, a grim reminder of the lengths to which fear can drive a society. Mather's memorable providences became a testament to the times, a vivid chronicle of suspicion, suffering, and the insidious grip of belief in witchcraft that would haunt New England for decades to come. The echoes of the Goodwin children's plight would resonate through the ages, a somber reflection of humanity's eternal struggle with the unknown. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue across the battlefield, where the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the distant echoes of clashing steel. It was July 4th, 1863, a date that would mark the annals of history, the day when fate would shift for both the Union and the Confederacy. The town of Gettysburg lay quiet, yet its streets were soon to be filled with the sounds of war and the cries of men, each one driven by a sense of duty, honor, or perhaps desperation. On one side stood the steadfast Union soldiers, their blue uniforms stained with the sweat and grime of battle. They had endured a long and grueling march to reach this pivotal moment, their resolve as firm as the earth beneath their feet. Across the field, the Confederate forces, clad in their gray coats, were not simply fighting for territory. They were fighting for a cause they believed in fiercely. The tension in the air was palpable as both sides prepared for what would become one of the most significant confrontations in American history. As the first shots rang out, they echoed like thunder across the rolling hills, signaling the start of a conflict that would see men testing the very limits of bravery and endurance. With each volley of cannon fire, the earth trembled, and the screams of the wounded filled the air, mingling with the cries of commands barked through the chaos. It was a cacophony that would haunt the memories of those who survived, an unending reminder of the choices made on that fateful day. Among the throng of soldiers was a young sergeant named Thomas, a man of humble beginnings who had enlisted with dreams of heroism and glory. He had never envisioned the grim reality of battle, where the lines between right and wrong blurred in the hut of conflict. As he crouched behind a rocky outcropping, his heart raced, not just from fear, but from the weight of responsibility bearing down upon him. He had seen friends fall, men he had laughed with and shared stories around the campfire, now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. In that moment, as the world around him erupted into chaos, Thomas felt an undeniable shift within himself. It was as if the very essence of the battlefield had seeped into his soul, igniting a fire of determination that would not be extinguished. He glanced to his left, where his friend Jacob was reloading his musket, a fierce glint in his eye, and to his right, where the veteran Sergeant Hayes barked orders with the authority of a man who had seen too much in his lifetime. This was not merely about survival anymore. It was about standing for something greater than themselves, about the future of a nation. The hours dragged on, the sun inching further down the sky, casting long shadows over the field. The Union's defensive lines held, but at a staggering cost. Thomas could see the toll the battle was taking on both sides, the bodies littering the ground, a stark testament to the ferocity of the fight. Yet with each passing moment, he felt something shift within him, a sense of purpose that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The clamor of battle faded into the background, replaced by a singular focus on his mission. He knew he had to act. With a deep breath, Thomas rose from his cover, his musket gripped tightly in his hands. He charged forward, rallying his fellow soldiers with a cry that echoed over the din of battle. "For our homes, for our families," he shouted, his voice rising above the chaos, igniting a spark of courage in those around him. He saw the hesitant faces of his comrades turn resolute, driven by the urgency of his words. Together they surged forward, a tide of blue against the gray. The ground shook beneath their feet as they advanced, propelled by a collective will stronger than fear. Thomas felt invincible, as if the spirit of every soldier who had fought before him coursed through his veins. The battlefield transformed into a theater of valor, where every step forward was a defiance against despair. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of crimson and violet, the battle raged on with renewed ferocity. The cries of men became a symphony of sacrifice, and within that chaos, a turning point was born. Thomas, in the heart of the storm, was no longer just a soldier. He was a beacon of hope, embodying the very essence of perseverance. When the dust finally settled, and the echoes of gunfire faded into an uneasy silence, the battlefield bore testament to the bravery displayed that day. Though the cost had been monumental, the sacrifice was not in vain. The Union had held its ground, and Thomas, forever changed, understood that this battle was not just about the land. It was about the souls who inhabited it, the dreams that would carry on, and the future that awaited beyond the horizon. In the days and months to come, the name Gettysburg would resonate through the ages, a reminder of a pivotal clash that not only shaped the course of a war, but also transformed the hearts of those who fought. For Thomas it was a defining moment, a mark on his soul that would guide him for the rest of his days, a turning point that illuminated the path toward a new dawn where the ideals of freedom and unity would ultimately prevail. As the trials dragged on, doubt began to grow. Spectral evidence, ghosts and dreams became harder to justify. Governor Phipps had finally intervened, disbanding the original court and forbidding spectral evidence. The Superior Court of Judicature, formed in 1693, quickly acquitted most remaining prisoners. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the sprawling landscape. Beneath the vast expanse of the sky, the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. It was the year 1845, a time when the air was thick with promise, and the whisper of change danced on the edges of every conversation. As the final rays of sunlight slipped away, a profound stillness enveloped the land, hinting at the monumental events that were about to unfold. In the heart of a bustling town, where the cobblestone streets echoed with the sound of horse-drawn carriages and the chatter of townsfolk, a young man stood at a crossroads. His name was Thomas, a spirited dreamer with a heart full of ambition and a mind brimming with ideas. He gazed into the distance, where the great unknown beckoned him like a siren's call. It was not just an ordinary journey he envisioned. It was a quest that promised adventure, discovery, and perhaps even glory. Thomas had spent countless nights poring over maps and old journals, filled with tales of explorers who ventured into uncharted territories. Each story ignited a fire within him, urging him to step beyond the familiar confines of his life. He yearned to carve his name into history, to leave behind a legacy that would echo through the ages. But the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the doubts of those around him loomed like dark clouds on the horizon. As the town clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of a new day, Thomas made his decision. He would embark on his journey, leaving behind the safety of home and the comforts of the life he had known. With a heart full of courage, he gathered his belongings, each item carefully chosen for its utility in the wild. A sturdy compass, a weathered journal, and a well-worn map that had seen better days. With the first light of dawn creeping over the rooftops, Thomas set out on foot, his spirit buoyed by hope and resolve. Each step he took resonated with the promise of adventure, the air crackling with possibility. He navigated through the winding streets, bidding farewell to the familiar faces that had shaped his childhood. The baker waved, the blacksmith nodded, and the children played, oblivious to the momentous journey that was about to unfold. As he ventured further from the town's embrace, the landscape morphed into a tapestry of rolling hills and lush forests. The scent of pine wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest floor. Thomas paused for a moment to breathe it all in, the serenity of nature enveloping him like a comforting blanket. Here, amidst the towering trees and the symphony of rustling leaves, he felt a sense of belonging that transcended the boundaries of civilization. Days turned into weeks as Thomas traversed the rugged terrain, his resolve unwavering. He faced the biting chill of the night and the sweltering heat of the day, each challenge testing his mettle. Yet with every obstacle, he grew stronger, more resilient. The world around him became a canvas of vibrant colors and breathtaking vistas, each landscape more awe-inspiring than the last. Majestic mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks kissed by clouds, while rivers wound their way through valleys like ribbons of silver. Along his journey, Thomas encountered kindred spirits, fellow travelers who shared his thirst for adventure. They exchanged stories around crackling campfires, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the night. Together they forged bonds that transcended the boundaries of their diverse backgrounds, united by a shared sense of purpose. With each passing day, they inspired him to push further, to explore the depths of his own potential. But as the days turned into months, a shadow loomed on the horizon. News of conflict and turmoil reached his ears. Whispers of struggle and strife echoed through the valleys, a stark reminder of the fragility of peace. Thomas felt a tug in his heart, a calling to not only seek adventure, but to stand for something greater. He pondered the battles fought by those who had come before him, their sacrifices etched into the very fabric of history. And so, with renewed determination, Thomas set his sights on a new destination, a place where he believed he could make a difference, a place where courage and conviction intersected. His journey was no longer just for himself. It was a quest to champion the ideals he held dear and to lend his voice to the voiceless. As he traversed the last stretch of his journey, the horizon stretched before him, a canvas of possibility painted in hues of gold and crimson. The sun set behind him, illuminating the path ahead, while the stars began to twinkle like distant dreams waiting to be realized. Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of purpose, a deep understanding that his journey was merely the beginning of a much larger story, one that would resonate through the ages, echoing in the hearts of those who dared to dream and to fight for a better tomorrow. The Legacy. The Salem Witch Trials, a dark chapter in the history of colonial America, left an indelible scar upon the hearts and minds of the community. The echoes of fear and suspicion that reverberated through Salem village during those harrowing months lingered long after the nooses had tightened and the flames had dimmed. As the dust of hysteria settled, the survivors and descendants of the accused found themselves grappling with the weight of guilt, shame, and a desperate yearning for redemption. In the wake of this tragic episode, the colony sought to atone for the grievous injustices that had unfolded. In Funrum, a somber day of fasting and repentance was declared, a poignant acknowledgment of the suffering endured by the innocent. The townsfolk, clad in their sober attire, gathered in the meeting house, their faces drawn and solemn as they reflected upon the wrongs committed in the name of fear. The air was thick with a palpable sense of remorse, and prayers for forgiveness echoed off the wooden beams, rising toward the heavens like smoke from a flickering candle. It was a day not only to repent for the past, but to commit to a future where reason and compassion would reign supreme. As the years slipped by, the burden of regret weighed heavily on the shoulders of those who had once been so quick to accuse. Inasmuch as sakes, amid the shadows of her own conscience, Ann Putnam, Jr., one of the most fervent accusers during the trials, stepped forward with a heart full of remorse. In a moment that would reverberate through history, she offered a public apology, her voice trembling as she addressed the gathered crowd. She acknowledged the pain she had caused, the innocent lives shattered by her words, and the grief that had enveloped the community. Her act of contrition was not just a personal redemption, but a beacon of hope for others, a call to recognize the humanity in those who had suffered unjustly. The passage of time did little to erase the scars, yet the colony continued its quest for healing. In 17 a landmark decision was reached as financial compensation was awarded to the families of many victims. This act of restitution was not merely a token gesture. It was a tangible recognition of the profound loss and suffering endured by those who had been wronged. The clinking of coins and the rustle of parchment as families received their due echoed like a soothing balm across the land, a small measure of justice in a world that had so sorely lacked it. It was a step towards reconciliation, a promise that the memories of the innocent would not be forgotten, and that the lessons of the past would guide the colony toward a brighter, more enlightened future. As the colony moved forward, the legacy of the Salem witch trials served as a constant reminder of the fragility of justice and the dangers of unchecked fear. The path to atonement was long and fraught with challenges, but the collective yearning for understanding and healing illuminated the way. Through repentance, acknowledgement, and compensation, Salem began to reclaim its identity, striving to transform a history marked by tragedy into one that embraced compassion and wisdom. The scars of the past may never fully fade, but in the heart of the community, the determination to learn from those dark days sparked a hope that would endure for generations to come. Even 3 centuries later, the memory persists. In 1692, on the 200th anniversary, a Memorial Park was built in Salem and Danvers. In our 20 Tunes, a monument was placed at Proctor's Ledge, the confirmed site of the executions. In the annals of history, the year 2022 marked a momentous occasion, a profound turning point that resonated deeply within the collective conscience of society. It was in this year that a long-buried injustice was finally addressed, as the final chapter of a dark saga came to its long-awaited conclusion. Elizabeth Johnson, Jr., the last convicted Salem witch, was officially exonerated, a monumental act of justice that arrived nearly 330 years after she was condemned in the fervent chaos of the infamous Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials, which unfolded in the late 17th century, were a grim reflection of society's fears, a tempest of paranoia that swept through the small Puritan settlement like wildfire. Innocent lives were shattered, reputations tarnished, and the very fabric of the community frayed under the weight of hysteria. Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. found herself ensnared in this web of fear and suspicion, accused of witchcraft, and condemned to a fate she did not deserve. For generations, her name was whispered in hushed tones, a symbol of injustice that echoed through the corridors of time. As the years turned into decades, and decades into centuries, Elizabeth's story remained a haunting reminder of the consequences of mass hysteria and the fragility of justice. Many sought to shine a light on the darkness of her legacy, advocating for her exoneration and striving to clear her name. Their relentless efforts were fueled by a growing recognition of the need to confront the past, to acknowledge the wrongs committed in the name of fear and superstition, in a historic moment that reverberated across the nation. 2022 bore witness to the culmination of this movement, the exoneration of Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. was not merely a legal victory. It was a powerful statement against the injustices that had persisted for centuries. The act of clearing her name was a profound acknowledgement that the sins of the past could not be forgotten, that the spirits of those wronged deserved recognition and reparative justice. Communities across the country celebrated this landmark decision. The exoneration resonated beyond the confines of a single case. It became a symbol of resilience and the enduring fight for truth. Elizabeth Johnson, Jr.'s story, once marred by tragedy, was transformed into a beacon of hope, inspiring new generations to learn from history and advocate for justice. As people gathered to honor her memory, they reflected on the lessons learned from the Salem witch trials. They recognized the importance of empathy, understanding, and the necessity of safeguarding against the dangers of unchecked fear and prejudice. Elizabeth's exoneration stood as a reminder that the echoes of history can guide us toward a brighter future, urging society to confront its past mistakes and strive for a more just and equitable world. In the end, the exoneration of Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. was not just a singular event. It was a profound reckoning with history, a moment that illuminated the path toward healing and redemption. Nearly there was 30 years. After her condemnation, the final chapter closed, but the story of her resilience and the fight for justice would continue to resonate, a timeless reminder that truth, even after centuries, has the power to rise and triumph over injustice. In the shadowy depths of history, the year 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, remains a haunting testament to the power of fear, superstition, and unchecked authority. It was a time when the air was thick with suspicion, and the very fabric of a community could unravel at the slightest whisper. The townsfolk, gripped by a chilling anxiety that seeped into their bones, found themselves ensnared in a web of hysteria that would lead to tragic consequences. As the sun rose over the quaint village, casting a golden hue across the cobblestone streets, an undercurrent of dread pulsed through the hearts of its inhabitants. The whispers began innocently enough, sparked by the strange behavior of a handful of young girls who claimed to be tormented by dark forces. Their cries for help, initially met with concern, quickly morphed into accusations that spiraled out of control. In a society deeply rooted in puritanical beliefs, where the line between the divine and the diabolical was perilously thin, the thought of witchcraft ignited a firestorm of paranoia. Fueled by a potent mix of religious fervor and societal pressures, neighbors turned against one another, casting aside reason and empathy in favor of blind loyalty to the prevailing fear. The authorities, emboldened by the fervent cries for justice, wielded their power like a sword, eager to root out the supposed evildoers. Trials were hastily convened, and the courtrooms, once symbols of justice, transformed into arenas of chaos. The gavel fell with a thud, echoing the finality of decisions made in the heat of passion rather than the cool light of reason. The accused, many of whom were innocent, stood before their judges, trembling not just from fear of the gallows, but from the crushing weight of a society that had lost its way. Families were torn apart, friendships shattered, and the bonds of community frayed as the specter of suspicion loomed large. The air was thick with the scent of betrayal, and the cries of the condemned resounded through the streets, haunting the very soul of Salem. Yet amidst the turmoil, a flicker of truth began to emerge, like a candle's flame in the darkness. Though delayed by the fervor of the trials and the fervent belief in the supernatural, the relentless pursuit of justice could not be extinguished. As the dust settled, voices of dissent began to rise, questioning the motivations behind the accusations and the integrity of the proceedings. The very foundations of the witch trials began to tremble under the weight of reason and morality. In time, the truth would demand to be heard, echoing through the corridors of history and reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the light of reason and justice cannot be entirely snuffed out. Salem's dark year stands not only as a cautionary tale of what can happen when fear reigns supreme, but also as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of truth. It serves as a stark reminder that the consequences of unchecked authority can lead to devastating outcomes. But ultimately, the truth will rise, demanding recognition and respect, no matter how long it takes.